Almost every competitive deck follows one simple formula. They have their key game plan, which is like their win condition. They have a consistency engine, there's support and utility cards, and then some sort of energy count. So, today we're going to break down on how you should build a deck if you are planning on building a deck somewhat for the competitive Pokemon TCG. Now, it is way easier to net deck something and look it up on what some other genius person has invented and done, but if you wanted to try something new, or you think a Pokemon is competitively viable, this is sort of an outline or guide of how to make a Pokemon deck and how to make it somewhat competitive, or at least some things you should look into. The first step to putting together a competitive Pokemon TCG deck is your attackers. You want to figure out what your main game plan is and select your attackers to do that. Usually it's about one or two attackers with maybe a tech option or a final attacker. But either way, you need Pokemon to attack if you're trying to take 6 prizes. The support Pokemon. Sometimes when you have a Stage 2 attacking deck, your support Pokemon is the Stage 1, i.e. in Dragapult, the Dracloaks have an ability to draw cards. Sometimes it's a different line in general. You'll need other Pokemon. For example, Charizard EX usually is paired with a Pidgeot EX. The Pidgeot EX is a support Pokemon. It generally doesn't attack, but it has the ability to search out any card in the deck. So it's essentially a draw Pokemon. But there are also other categories of support Pokemon. But at least the two main categories for support Pokemon are it either draws you cards or it accelerates energy, or technically sometimes there's other things that your Pokemon can do when sitting on the bench. But those are the two main ones. So you should look for a Pokemon that can accelerate energy or a Pokemon that can draw cards on the bench for support Pokemon to help your main attacker do the thing that it wants to do without just losing the game because you can't play the game. And then one thing to consider as well is item locking is more of an attacker than a support Pokemon. So Budew I wouldn't really categorize as a support Pokemon, but an attacker, despite it kind of being both. And there's obviously some Pokemon that fit the role of both, but we'll not really get into that. You'll figure that out once you've picked your Pokemon. Another thing to consider when picking your Pokemon is the number of bench spaces that you have. If you have lots of different lines of Pokemon that you think will work really well together, are you able to put them all on the bench? Are you even able to set them all up? Keep those in mind when building your deck. Usually you only want like one line of attacking Pokemon, one line of support Pokemon, and that's really it. Sometimes there's like draw engines, or like engines of your deck. These are your support Pokemon. But like an engine could be, for example, Mew EX and Fezandipiti EX. Mew has an ability that if you have less than 3 cards in hand, you can draw until you have 3 cards in hand. So if you have 1 card in hand, you can draw 2 cards. And then Fezandipiti EX says when a Pokemon is knocked out by an opponent last turn, you can draw 3 cards. So if you have your attacker get KO'd and you have 1 card in hand, you can see 5 new cards with just those 2 Pokemon on the bench. And it's a pretty good engine. A lot of decks use it in the competitive scene right now. Now we're going to talk about trainers. More specifically, supporters to start. Supporters are probably the thing you should consider first when putting trainer cards into your deck, because your supporter cards are supposed to be the most powerful one out of all of the supporter types, because there is a restriction on them. You can only play it once per turn, or you can only play a supporter card once per turn. So the supporter card that you play per turn should be pretty powerful. Try to pick supporter cards that are very powerful. For example, Lily's Determination. You can shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 8 cards if you have 6 prize cards remaining, otherwise you draw 6, which is still pretty good. Professor's Research, which discards your hand and draws 7. That's pretty strong. You could pick something that accelerates energy, like a Crispin, which accelerates energy. I don't know how to describe it better than that. Or you can consider cards like Boss's Orders, which is an unconditional gust that can win you the game. And that's pretty good, winning the game is. Now let's talk about items. Items should be something that can search out specific parts of your game plan that help you progress playing the game. Mainly, this can be seen through Buddy Buddy Poffins, Nest Balls, Ultra Balls, which are all Pokemon search. Something that finds you your Pokemon. Those are all really strong cards. Another good thing to search out is your energies. Something like Energy Search or Earthen Vessel right now are good cards to search out energy, something that progresses you forward. Another good item card is Pokegear 3.0, which lets you look at the top 7 cards and find a supporter card, which supporter cards, as we say, are the most powerful type of trainer, so it's something that can progress you forward into the game. Or it progresses the game plan by itself, which are something like a Jumbo Ice Cream, which in a deck like Kangaskhan Buffalant can heal damage off, which is the goal of that deck, which is to survive attacks and last longer. So something that can heal will help that. Now, mind you, healing cards aren't always great to play. They have to be usually a lot of damage to prevent your Pokemon from getting two-shot. So something like Potion isn't great. There's just better value for your card. You can only have 60 cards in a deck, and if you're playing 4 Potion to heal 80 damage instead of 1 Jumbo Ice Cream that heals 80 damage, it's like not great. So you gotta think about the value. Actually, I also don't know if Potion heals 20 damage or if it heals 30, but let's say for the example, I'm right. Yeah. Anyway, your item card should be something that helps you progress the game and be usually pretty consistent. Or it's like a counter catcher that can help you win the game, that gives you a conditional gust. Next up, we're going to be talking about tool cards. The main idea of a tool card is that it picks up the slack of your Pokemon. If your Pokemon's has like a weakness of some kind, usually a tool card can fix that. For example, if your Pokemon that you've picked don't have a great turn 1 attack and you don't want to put in another attacker, you can play something like TM Evolution, which is a great turn 1 attack if you have nothing else to do. So it's something that progresses your board state while being on a tool. So it fixes your turn 1 attack. Or something like an ability that your Pokemon doesn't have that you can put on a tool that can do that, like EXP Share, that helps maintain energy on the board, or something like that. Or it like fixes the health of a Pokemon, like a Bravery Charm, or a Luxurious Cape, or Hero's Cape. Something that can make your guys a little bit tankier. And lastly, it's usually to fix damage. Something like a Max Belt, a Vitality Band, a Defiance Band, or a Brave Bangle. Something that will increase the damage that your Pokemon put out because they're just shy of getting a KO. So you need the tool to be able to progress your game plan further and take the one-hit KO. So that's usually what you want to have with your tool. Now let's talk about stadiums. So stadiums, don't really look into them too deeply. They're either to help your consistency, something like an Artisan, or something that is good for your game plan but not your opponent's, like Lively Stadium, or Jamming Tower, or Team Rocket's Watchtower. But you also usually want to consider the fact that it won't hurt your game plan. So if you don't play any tools, because your Pokemon are the goats, you could play something like Jamming Tower to prevent your opponent from playing tools, but it doesn't harm your guys because you don't have any tools. Or if you don't have any colorless Pokemon with abilities, you could play something like Team Rocket's Watchtower to stop your opponent from using colorless Pokemon's abilities, but not your own because you don't have any. Something that's like kind of one-sided is what you should try to find in your stadium cards. Recovery cards. Something's going to go wrong, or you're going to lose an attacker, or you're going to have to discard something early to an Ultra Ball to play the game. Recovery cards are ways of getting your Pokemon or your energy or even like a supporter back from the discard into either your deck or your hand. These are something that you should usually play low counts of because you want to play the cards that you're going to be using, not the cards to recover the things. So, yeah. But recovery can also act as a fifth copy of a card, for example. If you plan on using 6 attackers of the same attacker, you can't play 6 copies of one card, but you could play 4 attackers and 2 Night Stretchers to get 6 attackers, for that example. Which means that you should roughly play 1 to 3 recovery cards. Now, what your recovery cards might look like are Night Stretcher if you're trying to get a Pokemon or energy back, but you need not very many of them back. If you need low quantities of recovery. For example, you only need to get about 1 energy back a game, or 1 Pokemon back a game, you should play like Night Stretchers. If a lot of your Pokemon goes down, or you need to shuffle a lot of energy back into the deck, you could consider something like a Super Rod that can get more things back, but it goes into your deck instead of your hand, so it's a little harder to find once you've recovered it. Now, even greater quantities of getting cards back are cards like Sacred Ash or Energy Recycler. They'll get you 5 back from the discard, but it's either Pokemon, you could only get Pokemon, or you could only get energies back from the discard, which isn't as great. Another recovery to look into is something like Lana's Aid, which is a supporter card. So if you have a really bad time into item lock, consider something like Lana's Aid to be able to get your guys back, because supporter cards still work under item lock kind of thing. Next up, we're going to be talking about mobility cards. There should be some way to move your Pokemon in a game of Pokemon. Whether this comes from Latias, if you only have basic Pokemon, it is another support-ish Pokemon that you can put on your bench to give all of your Pokemon free retreat. It could be a tool such as Air Balloon that gives your Pokemon 2 less retreat cost, which could be useful if your Pokemon have 2 retreat cost. Even just attaching to retreat is fine, so consider the retreat cost of all of your Pokemon, whether you need mobility or not, because if your Pokemon have only a retreat cost of 1, you might not need a Latias or an Air Balloon because you can just attach to retreat it. You could consider a Switch, which is an item card that moves them. This could be something useful if you need to move 2 Pokemon into the active. For example, retreating 1 Pokemon into another and then switching that one out for another. And then there's also cards like Professor Turo's Scenario and Penny, which will pick up your Pokemon off of the board and then back into your hand, and then you can put down. This will help you alleviate liabilities from your board. But they're also kind of tech cards and less mobility. And speaking of tech cards, that is another brand of card that goes into your deck and should be something that you consider. Now, when you're making your first deck and you don't exactly know what meta you're going to be playing into, I wouldn't recommend putting any tech cards in your deck if you can avoid it. Because the more tech cards that you have, the less consistent your deck will be, and while it might increase one matchup by 2%, you lose every other matchup by 4%. So it's something that you should consider, the risks of a tech card. Now, what is a tech card if you don't know? A tech card is something that's not geared towards fixing your game plan, but more specifically, taking advantage of a weakness that your opponent's game plan has. Yeah, it's something like Professor Turo's scenario is considered a tech card in Gardevoir, because it doesn't make Gardevoir's game plan any better, but it stops people from retreat locking their Pokemon for forever, so it's an answer in that way. Now, it's not great in a consistency spot, because if your opponent's not retreat locking your Pokemon, you probably will never play the Turo. But sometimes if there's enough decks that are retreat locking, you'll want to play it so you don't auto lose to those games. It's sort of a balancing game, but if in a vacuum, the deck alone, you don't want to play tech cards. Now I'm going to drop a quote for you guys. You don't win by having answers, you win by finding them. That also means don't play tech cards that you can't find. If you have no way of searching out supporter cards, don't play a one of supporter, because you probably won't be able to find it, much less find it when you need it. Which means please just play more consistency cards in your decks. Right now the meta is full of inconsistent decks, even like pros are playing decks that aren't super consistent, mainly because they're able to sequence things better than the average player, but sometimes you can just get variance. Energy counts. You should have at least enough energy to set up your attacker 3 times. Mainly because you usually only need 3 attackers to win a game, and if they get through 2 attackers, especially if you're all 2 prize attackers, and they get through 3 of them, you've already lost. So it doesn't matter to set up more than that. But usually it's not a bad idea to be able to set up 4 attackers, because then you can have room to retreat energy to move your Pokemon, or discard energy, or prize energy. But generally, it's about the ability to set up 3 attackers. Now that you've done all that, the last thing that you should do is test your deck. Something's not going to feel right, and you'll need to change cards around. But theory crafting a deck, usually you'll get you most of the way there with this sort of outline, and then those are the things that you should think about when crafting your deck, building your deck, whatever you want to call it. But then you should always play your deck, test your deck, talk to your friends, see if you need more recovery, if you need more boss, if you want more attackers, if a card you have in your deck you don't play ever in any of your matchups once, maybe consider cutting the card. Anyway, that's my thoughts on how to build a deck. If you don't want to build a deck, check out this video that I did on 3 decks that are pretty good for beginners. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked or want to see more of it. Hasta la vista.